All right, guys, and welcome back to Taking Chances. As I talked to you guys on the last episode, this is the refiring of the entrepreneur episodes. So the first few guests that I'm going to have over the next month or so are going to be a lot of folks that I've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So coming into us today live from Pennsylvania, one of my old stomping grounds, we have Robert Jamieson, the owner of CSM. Robert, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and I know this is going to be a fun podcast for us because you and I talk to each other more than we'd probably like to at times being on some of the projects, but really hoping you and I get to know each other a little bit today too. Obviously, Taking Chances, as you and I've talked, is really a story about elevating folks that have taken a chance on themselves. This year, specifically focusing on entrepreneurships. God knows you and I have had a ton of conversations around where the world's going, what's happening in the world, all these transitions. So I think this is a really good show for us to get to know a little bit about you, what makes Bob tick. And, I'd love to hop right into that, Bob. So as the owner of CSM, just tell the guests a little bit about what that is, and then we'll probably go right into your origination story.
Yeah, so CSM International is a managed service provider for IT. So we provide IT services to a wide variety of companies, Fortune 100 to small businesses. And it's a very evolving business. And so we'll probably talk about this because the evolution is going into AI, is going into thinking about quantum cryptology, but we'll talk about that as we go through this today.
In MSP, so we represent a lot. That's a managed service provider. But for some of our folks that might be for brick and mortar, do you want to just talk like high level what you guys are doing to service folks, just so the guests can get a little bit better grasp of what it is that you do?
Yeah, so IT, generally speaking, doesn't fix itself. And so what our team does is we have back-end individuals. In fact, CSM has got about 50 people in the Philippines that have been with me since 2016, provide the services to make sure that the network is working well, that the computers are working well, that they're patched, that everything is functioning is very proactive maintenance versus reactive, though we do reactive also because that happens, things happen in the world. But it's providing that type of services. And we also provide services on site when required. So that's like a desk side person who helps configure computers for people, individuals.
So you are the folks that everyone hopes they don't have to call, and they're probably under a lot of pressure when they do make the call, right? I mean, I just know that from being in operations. It's like, don't call the IT guys on the weekend, but everything's going to break when there's not service hours. And I know from how CSM works too, it's 24/7 support there. So just tell me a little bit about your background, right? I mean, that's such a unique business. I'm curious about, Bob, how you grew up. I want to know, like, is this something you're passionate about? I know you've got a depth of a military background, but I mean, maybe just talk to me a little bit about, where you were born. Was this a vision you had from childhood, and then it kind of came to fruition? I never got to ask that, but how did you start your young years in your stomping grounds?
Yeah, so happened to be born in California, Long Beach, California. My dad was a U.S. Marine, so we moved around a lot. But Long Beach, California was kind of a place we always recycled back to quite a lot. So grew up in California, surfing, doing all the things you do in California, a lot of sunshine. I got into IT at 17. I didn't want to get into IT. I didn't decide to get into IT, but I joined the Marine Corps at 17. And they put me into IT. So they figured I couldn't be a grunt. My dad was a grunt, infantryman. He actually was awarded the Silver Star for combat heroism. And so I always admired who he was and what he did. And I didn't want to be a POG, person other than grunt. But
Okay.
I ended up being that.
I learned an acronym today.
Yeah, so I joined the Marine Corps. Again, after I finished up infantry training, they put me into communications electronics, ended up going to the Naval Academy Preparatory School. So I was selected as an enlisted Marine to go to the Naval Academy. There's about 150 people a year that are either Navy or Marine that are selected for that. Dropped out of the Naval Academy, went back to the Fleet Marine Force. They didn't like that so much, so they sent me to a computer school where we had about 80% attrition rate. From there, I went into, at this point in time, the Marine Corps was getting into networking. So we didn't have network engineers, but more than network, we didn't have computer engineers. So I went through a year's worth of school on the East Coast. There's a joint services school where I learned everything from putting together networks, putting together cryptology, putting together security, maintaining servers, maintaining storage, the entirety of the IT stack, and then was sent to Barstow, California, where we have a depot, maintenance depot, and was the only IT guy anywhere in the high desert for
Sounds like how operations run today too. It's like well, there's one IT guy and 1,000 people. But what was that experience like for you? I mean, so it sounds like you were interested in tech. I don't want to say you got thrown into it, but it almost sounds like it did choose you. I think you actually said
it chose me, but I have to say that when I was growing up as a kid, I always thought of myself as being a rocket scientist. So I was always interested in science fiction and wanted to get into that area. So, I fought this whole thing of being inside of the space, but my Marine Corps career developed very, very rapidly. So I ended up being, for those who are familiar with the services, I made gunnery sergeant, which is E7. Made a warrant officer in this space. I then became a commissioned officer. So when I retired from the Marine Corps as a major in charge of all the electronic schools for the Marine Corps. So
that's intense.
it was a great progression. So it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. And I got to develop how the Marine Corps thought about training, electronics, repair, how we thought about it from a combat standpoint, how we thought about it I presented to Congress a couple times on how we approached fixing things in the field. So it ended up being very interesting and very formative for me.
So two things I want to just kind of hop in there. One is a story that you told me that I think we could pull out. One is another, just high level questions. I'm assuming sitting in that seat over the years, talk to me just a little bit about the technology transitions you probably saw even internally for the Marines or even to like when you went out private. But I'm assuming you probably were impacting some of the changes, but you've probably been front row seat for a lot of these similar transitions that the world's about to go through that we've already been through before. I mean, am I right in that assumption? Have you seen quite a few of those over the years?
So the first thing is the technology typically in the forces that we utilize in the Marine Corps was somewhere around 10 to 15 years ahead of the civilian sector. So we were working on technology that was significantly ahead of what you saw in a normal civilian company. And so during the first Gulf War, a good example, we had a big data solution where we were looking at a significant amount of data coming from the battlefield and then being displayed, massaged so the combat commanders could make decisions based upon the data that they were seeing. And that was in the 90s. That was significantly ahead of where we were in the early 2000s. So what I saw when I got out of the Marine Corps, I took a step back from a technology standpoint because the civilian sector just had not caught up with what the military was doing. What the military required, though, was adaptability. So we had to constantly adapt to a changing information landscape. And that's what, if you think about the late 1990s through the early 2000s, and I wrapped up all this, this in 2016, but we went through significant transitions when it came to information technology inside the services. And we had to be very adaptive.
It makes sense for your perspective too. And then the other one I just want to hone in on, and I'm going to butcher the story a little bit, but hopefully I can start it and it'll spark your memory. I think it's a lot about how you approach the world. You told me a story when we were in Pennsylvania. I think it was about a field service maintenance guy in the military having to fix a radio. And you said, okay, we kind of had these ideas back then where I'm either going to teach the person the field manual to fix this one radio, or I'm going to teach them like what could be wrong. So it was kind of like critical thinking. Can I pull that out of your head a little bit? Because I just think that is so much from the military, but also how you approach life and similarly to why we started working together. I just think that's gold.
Yeah, as the school commander, there's two different thoughts when it comes to maintaining systems. So thought number one is you teach people specific things about a specific system, and that's what they know. So they know how to fix a PRC, fill in the blank. This is a radio system. Or you teach people how to think about troubleshooting. So how to fault isolate, how to say, this isn't working. How do I segment this to an area that is working? And then how do I work my way to what isn't working? So it's a critical thought process of understanding how systems work. And it is not tied to a specific system. And so when I ran the school, that was our training. In fact, that was that presentation that I talked about. I did at headquarters of Marine Corps and then on to Congress, where we talked about the Army had a very specific. I have this thing, it's broken. I pull this out, I send it back to depot. I don't even think about how to fix whatever's out there. Our philosophy, the philosophy I had in the school was, you need to understand what's going on. You may not be able to get a spare part, so you need to be able to fix it in the field if you can. You need to think about it very, very critically to get to that point. So our school was much longer when it came to electronics than the other services.
I'm assuming people came out more versatile, though, and able to handle real world situations, especially in that field where, I mean, it's combat, so it's literally under fire at times, probably where, making the right decision with as much information as you have could be life or death for teams of folks. And I've seen you apply that, Bob. I've really seen you apply that to the teams. I've seen you apply that with the teams that we work with. But I think it's a very unique skill set that's needed in a lot of industries today, right? So even if you guys have heard me talk before about systems, there's different systems inside of operations or HR. But that's how I try to coach our teams as well. It's like to be agnostic to the actual tech and the tool that you're on, but to think about what the system is trying to do. And if you're able to get that leadership value kind of out of our heads into our teammates' heads, it really just pays dividends. So I just think that's a very unique perspective that you apply. So I've got your transition from the military, and I know that you're owning CSM, but talk to me about those first few years out of the military. I mean, where did you land yourself? I know you're all over the place, but what was that natural progression? What did it look like from going from, Bob the Marine to the major to the business owner? Because I know we got a couple years of gaps in between there. I won't say how many years, but
well, so a lot of the years were spent working in. I started off in the electronic side of security. This was at that point. There was significantly old technology inside of the security industry. And I'm talking about the people like ADT, the people that do that type of monitoring. By significantly old, I mean they were still operating these technology at these central stations. And obviously we're in a computer world. That's why I said there's huge disparity. So a lot
disconnects,
of
right? Yeah.
Huge disparity as far as how the systems, what systems they used and how technology had evolved. So a lot of what I was doing in the early years after I got out was refreshing the technology inside of that particular industry. But eventually, after I had gotten out of the Marine Corps, I got a job at Underwriters Laboratories, where I was responsible for the life safety and security industry. Now we're working with a little bit more modern industry, electronics that were coming in to provide security, fire safety, all those type of things. So it was assessing those technologies and making sure that they meet the specifications. This is what you all does. And then our CEO, Keith Williams, at one point said, we need to have a chief information security officer. Bob, you've got a background in this. Would you like to do that job? And of course I said, yes, I would. So I started off into the cybersecurity area. And it wasn't a large leap because basically I had a very fundamental understanding of all of IT. But in that IT background I talked about at 17 years old, when I first started out, we also spent a lot of time on the security side because that's what the government does. They want security for all the transmissions. And so it was an easy thing to make that transition. I had another company. I was the chief information security officer, Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. And then during the pandemic, decided to start my own business. So in the 2020s, start my own business, and that's where I've been ever since.
Well, I laugh when you say that, Bob, not for you, but and again, just interviewing you on this, I've forgotten what I remembered about you. We also launched AC Resource about 6 months before the pandemic. And I mean, I've got a breadth of entrepreneurs around us now that we're all in the same boat, So I really want to unpack that. But talk to me what it was like launching a business during the pandemic, because I'm sure as hell that wasn't part of the plan. I know it wasn't for me, but I'm sure that came with a group of challenges, right? I mean, if you don't mind, I'd love to unpack that a little bit. I mean, so how long before the pandemic did you guys launch? And then what did that look like as soon as it kind of hit you guys? Because this was, if you've watched the old episodes, the first Taking Chances was launched because of the pandemic, and we were just elevating those stories. And it's profound to hear, though, right? I mean, to me, that's the value that we're trying to give back is, man, sometimes you can't pick, guys, when the world's going to tap you on the shoulder. And a lot of times, but a lot of you guys are going through a paralysis by analysis, right? There's never a fucking right time. Let me tell you that. There's never a right time for you to do the next step. But for folks like Bob and I, when you have a vision and, Bob's just articulated that his life was leading him towards a certain direction. And I didn't even know this until this podcast, but talk to me about what that was like, Bob, just launching during the pandemic and then probably the impacts that might have made on you.
So the thought process was, so I had this team in the Philippines, and the team in the Philippines had been with me starting in 2016. I grew the team. So the Philippines is interesting because it has a very similar culture to the U.S. It's different than working with India and other places where the cultural differences are greater. In fact, the best Christmas party I've ever gone to was in the Philippines. It was just this wonderful celebration for Christmas. So we got to a point with the pandemic. The pharmaceutical company was deciding to slim down. They were looking at making some significant changes. At the same time, you had companies that were trying to operate, but they didn't have staff to provide on site to provide the services. So this looked like an opportunity. I had this staff of people that wanted to work with me. I had what I perceived as a need, which is providing remote services. And so that's where I started.
And I'm assuming it probably went pretty well for you then too, right? I mean, because we kind of looked at it the same way. It's like right now the whole world's closing down. We lost 4 industries overnight. I mean, we had over 120,000 in recs going into placements, and we woke up the next day and it was to 0. And those industries, I mean, I had to make a hard decision day one. It's like, okay, we're going to rest on our laurels. And again, we're mostly hospitality today, but for 2 years during the pandemic, we didn't touch hospitality. We did HR, we did remote, but we saw the same kind of thing. It's what is essential, what's non-essential. And we had to make some pivots, and it wasn't even a scary decision to make because we were talking about this on day 2, and a lot of people that ended up going bankrupt were talking about it 6 months in. So I think that's one thing of why I love working with you too. It's like we're going to deal with reality quite a bit. We're going to have a vision that's A to B, but we have to be able to critically think, like Bob's talking about, and be able to address the world around us and make adaptations in real time. Talk to me about some of the wins and failures you have, right? So I know that what you're doing for managed service provider. I know that you had the team that sounds like they stayed with you. Talk to me about some of the wins you had during the start of the pandemic or even the start of the business, and maybe what are some opportunities that you've learned that you would do a little bit differently if you had to start over again?
Yeah, so I would say the losses outweighed the wins in the beginning. So, one of the things we had to do is be very adaptable. I had a project that come up, and this is late 2020, early 2021, where a particular healthcare provider needed to put in a new PKI environment. This is a public-private crypto environment, so it's a probably key infrastructure. But anyway, so walking into it, I knew what we had to do, but I didn't really have staff to do it. And the staff that I applied to that particular project didn't do well during the first couple of months, so we almost got fired. I did a pivot. I brought in a guy who is still with me, Jerry Morales, and Jerry didn't know anything about PKI, but he was willing to learn. So this is really the key. It became a key thing when I started hiring people. So I changed my whole headset when it comes to hiring. So Jerry just dove into learning. This is like at Christmas time of 2020. And by 2021, dove into learning how PKI works, how it works specifically with Intune. This is with the Microsoft stack. And so we were able to recover the project and actually ended up with a successful delivery on time, a little bit ahead of schedule. So on time and on budget. But it was out of that failure where I put somebody on that I expected to know the stuff. The client's infrastructure was slightly different, and they didn't have that flexibility, that ability to pivot. What it caused me to do, I'm sorry, I know you're going to say something, but what it caused me to do is to say, you know what, I'm going to hire people for that adaptability factor. I'm going to screen for that more than what they know coming into the organization. So they may know networking, but I want them to adaptable so they can do PKI.
I want to repurpose that and probably showcase that to every client that we talk to, because if everyone could be adaptable and hire for that, especially in the world we live in, a lot of folks that are struggling with staffing today, they're just not connecting with their employees or their guests, right? Whatever it is in their endeavor. And what I mean by that is What makes people tick today is a lot different. Money is not the main motivator for everyone. Yeah, sure, work-life balance has a dirty language to some owners. It has a dirty language to some candidates. But really, what I find is if you're hiring for folks, especially in tech operations, honestly, at any space today, everything's changing, guys. If you're going to rest on your laurels of what you've known for the last 20 years or even 5 years, you're probably going to be doomed. And I think that's a really creative way to look at talent these days is we've got to find people that are going to be willing to grow with us. And then also understand that some people may have different passions. And if they outgrow us, that's okay too. I just always try to live this in, Bob. I've never looked at people as possessions. And I find the groups that struggle with staffing or employment usually are having a little bit of that nuance, right? Where, man, I've trained someone something and they're going to leave me, right? And they kind of start to get bitter about it. And it's what we call the giant victim statements. So if you know this moving in, if you know that we're living in an adaptable world, you got to kind of find the talent that's going to be willing to grow with you, especially with what we're doing. I mean, Bob and I will talk about some of this, but some of the projects that we're on together, we can't even release them because we weren't fast enough. The things are changing that much. Like a one-step process that works today might be a three-step process tomorrow, might be eliminated by a new connector in 3 weeks, and you don't even need the workflow. So I really appreciate that. Talk to me just really quick, Bob. So what industries is CSM currently in? And when I say industries, like I know you guys are representing a handful, but do you have like your main shtick, your main niche that you really focus on, or are you guys really adaptable to any kind of client and any kind of tech need?
So we're very flexible. So in the Marine Corps, so the Marine Corps' motto is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. We inside the Corps made our model Semper Gumby. So
Yep.
the right now, a lot of our clients are in healthcare. So I would say about 50%. We have a major client that does medical device manufacturing. We have healthcare clients in the Midwest, but we also have clients that are retail, providing tires or other types of things. So we have a wide variety of clients, people that are in tax, accounting, and out of that, we get a sense for what the market looks like, what the market needs are. Fact is, everybody, no matter who they are, really need to have and we'll probably talk about this in more detail, but really need to have a very, very rock solid IT infrastructure that has good security around it, and they need to own their data. And like I said, we'll talk about this because
Yep.
what does that data ownership mean? And when somebody else owns it, what does that mean? But we, so all of our clients are kind of in that same boat that when you go back to the medical device manufacturing, they have to own their data. They have to have security around the data. A lot of this is HIPAA or GDPR controlled
Yep.
information.
Government
So
regulations.
all those things, come into the things that we do. 50% of what we do is related to making sure that you have a secure and that your information is owned and is protected. And 50% is making sure that the systems are always up and that you have maximized your uptime.
It's pretty profound too how we got linked together because we think a lot about the coming from very different industries, and I do think it's a good time to hop in on that a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about just about the cloud. I mean, because we're going to pivot into this how you and I found each other, but I think this is a good. You've shined a lot of light on a subject that is antithesis from what the world talks about to me, and I've kind of seen this happen real world. I've pushed back on you quite a bit in private and probably some in public too, just about, hey, Bob, I don't know if the world's going there yet, but I mean, I can say this with confidence, getting to know you and just observing some of the things now. We're in a massive transition. I don't think most people even know, listen to this, besides tech folks, I don't think they even know what we're talking about owning data now. I know all my consumers, right, as we're doing this endeavor together now, when I start to tell high-level CEOs who are worth, you know, multiple 8 figures on a sheet, they have no idea what the conversation is. So talk to me first of all about what the cloud is. I know that you guys are heavily into it, and then maybe where you think the exposure potentially is for folks as we move forward.
Yeah. And the first thing is, the cloud is really nothing special. It's using somebody else's computer that's somewhere else. That's what the cloud is. That's the definition of the cloud. So it's like I don't have a computer here on my desk. I have just a terminal and the computer sits in somewhere else in some data center. Fundamentally that's it. But there's a couple of things that go with this. One is the cloud is far more expensive, significantly more expensive than if you have compute and your data local. And I know people will argue with that, but we actually have the receipts. We know that this is the case, and we can prove it in all manner of cases. The second thing is the cloud is not that efficient. It's not that flexible. You get a kind of a one size fit all with minor modifications for an application in the cloud, because that's how it's built. It's built so that everybody's using the same thing, whereas an application on-prem can be heavily modified to meet whatever the requirements are for that particular company. So that's the second piece, is it's not hugely flexible. Third piece is this data piece. When you think about a free service in the cloud, it's not free. You're giving up your data to somebody else, and that other somebody else is using your data, monetizing your data. So they're using you're using your data to make money on you. That's
releasing your data back to you. And then the same companies will sell you 3 to 4 solutions that are an overlay for data as a CRM and ATS, whatever industry you're in. And then they're going to release you your data back to populate it in a way that humans need to think about.
Well, and so if you think about what's going on in the world right now, I think this is where I get very passionate. A couple of things are happening in the world. First off, buying tech is cheap. It is not expensive to get a significant amount of tech. And I'm talking about computing capability, storage, all those things. And there is a significant amount of non-big tech owned applications that you can apply to that technology. So having your data locally, I'm going to give a good example for the hospitality industry. Having your data locally on, let's say, a machine that costs somewhere around $5,000 to $6,000, but it gives you the ability to have your own website. It gives you the ability to have your own analog to open table. It gives you the ability to have your own ability to process receipts. And so when big tech goes down, first off, you don't go down as an owner. And actually, you would thrive with that. But it gets into this other piece, and I just talked about open table. So if you have the ability to own the data, in other words, you have the data, let's say you're coming up with something special for your restaurant, all those people who booked reservations for you are potentially new customers for something special that you have coming up. You have access to that data. It's your data. I'm not saying cloud is bad all the time. Cloud is good for a backup. Cloud is good for some purposes. But for operating a business, you really want your data local. And I want to mention one more thing about this, and that is I still at times work with the Marine Corps on cybersecurity and other types of types of things. But anyway, I was at a conference, and this is very public information. I was at a conference with the Marine Corps. This is about 2 years ago. And they are talking about, at that point, having information islands and energy islands. The problem set they have is if the grid goes down, A, you don't have any power. You're down. B, if the grid goes down, you're not getting to your data centers. You're not getting to that information. So how do you plan for a point when that happens? And as we've seen over the last several months, information, it isn't the grid going down, but it's information sources going down, which I know in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, when the AWS went down, there were several restaurants who could not do business.
I was just going to say, we've had Cloudflare go down recently, AWS, lots of cyber attacks. And another topic that I love to just cover with you, and again, this is near and dear to me as we've got property in Indiana now, and this is becoming, we've got the Leap build, we've got the Illy build, we've got the Meta build that's going on, and potentially the Microsoft data center. Conversations that we're just starting to see percolate. And again, I don't think most folks know this. I'll let you hone into this because you can speak more intelligently, but we do not have the current power supply to facilitate the AI growth that's going to come. That's factor number one. Factor number two, we're starting to see some of the first political pushback on both sides for what these data centers are going to take and what it's doing to the local communities as far as water and resource charges go. I know it's not a national topic yet, Bob, and I know you and I've talked about this a little bit, but we can talk about some of these articles we're seeing here. I think as this grows in the need and the constraints, as we have both brands moving on to AI, the need for new data centers, I think this subject of sovereignty and owning data not only is for security, but I don't think what we're doing currently with the cloud, this is also going to piss some people off. It's not scalable to where we need to be in 2 years. We
Right.
kind of already know that, right? As a group. So can you add any like highlights onto there a little bit more intelligently to me? Because I've just started to see some of the articles, but I feel with your background, you probably know what the power constraints are going to be on local folks, maybe, and just some of the stuff that may be coming down in the next 6 to 18 months.
Yeah. So a couple of things here. So I want to talk about the AI piece. And now we have not developed our own, we have taken AI models and we have put them local. So fundamentally, we've taken AI models, we've developed those AI models. So we've taken out restrictions, we've taken out things that we didn't want, developed them as far as their personality is concerned. What we have today, and there's a lot of hype on AI. What we have today is called artificial narrow intelligence. It can do tasks, but it's not 100%. If you go to Claude and you have it write your software, 80% of the time is pretty good. If you can't lead it though, if you can't work with it and make corrections, it's still an 80% solution. So we have very, very artificial narrow intelligence, but this artificial narrow intelligence can be trained to do things.
Really
So
trained. Yep.
it's not untrainable. It's just you can't expect too much of it. It's not going to take over the world, but it can augment people. But where I think a successful approach is that we have distributed AI, not totally under the control of big tech, but actually distributed. So people have AI operating in all their different locations. And that distributed AI is not going to take that enormous amount of power. It's distributed everywhere. It can reside on mesh networks, so you can share compute, you can share things that the cloud has, but it also means that if the internet goes down, if the networks go down, you're still operational. And by having something more distributed means that people who look for power aren't going to have that power over the models, but having it distributed means that people can individually operate and it doesn't have this severe impact on the overall power, water, and all those other infrastructural things that these big data centers have.
Yeah, it's like every subject in our country or in the West, I would say, is we know that there's a problem coming and we talk about the surface level bullshit that won't fix the problem, or we're too scared to get down to the mud. I'm not saying you and I, but I feel that it's a natural progression, even from the time that I've known Bob, and I think this is a good part to pull this in. I started with Bob's team as a client. We've got linked up through a local networking group that we had some like-minded friends, got together in person a few times, got to really see that we see the world similarly. This was profound for me. As I was getting to know Bob, I was diving into AI as an infant. Same thing we talk about always is go in with arms wide open and expect to get punched in the face, but be able to learn and adapt and how to dodge. And I think what was cool from my perspective is we both saw where the world was coming and where the world's going to, or had some concerns. Even though I'm speaking operations, a little bit of AI about what I know. Bob is owning a company that's an MSP. So some MSPs aren't in AI, folks, just if you know, are like tech. Oh, everyone does the same shit. Well, it's kind of like new store opening director and a director of ops for 20 years. Very similar profiles, very different kind of personalities though when you talk to them. But I got to experience Bob's work as a team. And just to kind of hone in on that, we've got a 17-step process that Bob's team has been developing that we knew there was 7 to 9 isolated products. And just to tie this together, I think the first conversation we had in a Bar Louie was, hey, the people that are fully in on AI are bullshit, and the people that think it's not coming are crazy. But, how do we apply this? And it's similar to me when I was in, even to go back to my first business, CBD, any keywords, I kind of go back to the NFT days too. It's not fully there yet, guys, but if you're not 10xing and augmenting your output, you're crazy. You're going to be light years behind. I do think in 2 years, maybe 18 months, we will have closer to what that is. There's conversations internally that it's intentionally being dumbed down. It's probably a conversation for another time, but let's talk about Ascendium real quick. Bob, you're obviously now coming in as a partner / founder of this master plan that we have built out. But let's talk a little bit about the software development wing, what you have, the support, and how we're kind of applying this software to go on to a hardware play, and we can really unpack some of the secrets of what we're working on.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. So first off, quickly, I think as we develop things, things need to be developed for people to easily use it. So from a philosophical standpoint, setting up a web page, a landing location where it's easy for somebody to navigate, very intuitive, And I think that's really key to anything we do. So I'm going to start with that. You want a landing page, you want a web
Nice
browser.
intuitive app,
Yeah,
kind of,
you
right?
want an application where I can find the information. It makes sense to me. It's very, very intuitive. Most people aren't about software. They're about operating a business. And so you want it built for that. The second thing is AI is overhyped, but it can do some things extraordinarily well. So we want to use it where it can augment. So, for a business owner, it can help them manage their budgets. It can help them source, I'll go back to hospitality, maybe source food at good prices. It can help them think about their business in a different way strategically than they would necessarily without the AI. So it becomes an augmentation. And that's really, when we think about Ascendium, that's really what Ascendium does. It helps them look at sourcing staff, doing it better.
Yeah, I want to hop in on that just to kind of open it up for the hospitality folks. So what Bob and I are talking about with building a server, I want you to imagine a world. I want you to imagine a world that you wake up at the end and you're getting your prime costs and you had no third-party fees. You had no third-party fees to take your food to DoorDash or Grubhub or Olo or any of those. You had no third-party fees for OpenTable or NoWait or your POS. You had no third-party fees for your operating system, for your inventory system. So to say all this, if we go out loud, we are applying a product right now that Bob's team and our team is developing together with a co-development with clients, real live, in 50 units currently. But what's beautiful to say about that software, Bob, and this is where I want to start to talk about this a little bit, on the same piece of software technology that can be $250 to a $500 landed price that can recruit for you, we can build an entire operating stack that would push out third-party ownership, or push out all third parties and have the ownership group actually owning their lines. Now, here's what's crazy, guys. When we talk about structured data, and this is me as an operator with an engineer on the call with me, when we have structured data and we're not trying to apply new systems to old systems, we can change the world quick. So, and we'll unpack this a little bit, Bob, but there's a lot of tech CEOs out there right now that are enamored for the teams the size of ours or even smaller than ours that are hitting 30 to 50 million with groups of 7. The reason they're doing that at scale, if you back up, is they're applying agentic processes to either very structured data where they have great API access, or they're taking workflow problems like the discovery calls we have. Hey, show me everything that you're doing. And what we're not going to do is charge you millions of dollars to develop into this piece of shit software. We're probably going to rip it down, start from base bones, and build back up. And I think that's just a philosophy that you and I both approach coming from different spaces is, hey, I'm not going to sell you anything. I want to see if we can help you. First, tell me what your pain points are and what you're going through. Yes, we could apply AI. A lot of times when we're on consulting and discovery calls, this is a funny one to Bob and I too, we're arguing with our own engineers that we don't always have to develop. Sometimes it's as simple as consulting, right? It's like, hey, you've got 3 APIs that are competing. I could charge you to throw another one in, but I would just like to tell you to remove those 2 pieces of software, try it for 2 weeks and see how that goes. Now, I say that, Bob, because it's both how we are. But I think we're both owners that love to drive sales from leaving clients with emotional debt because we help them, but we don't try to drive sales just to get another product out. And I think we both look at the world that way. I don't know if you had any comments to add in there. That was just kind of a TED Talk statement, but.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's 2 comments. One is perfection is the enemy of the good. So, sometimes you can try to become too perfect out the gate and you miss the whole thing, which is get something out there that's usable and learn from it, and you can build on it. So, to me, that's really, speed is very, very important. The second thing is listening to customers. So not selling. When I was at Underwriters Laboratories, Keith Williams came up with this thing about proactive customer engagement, because this was something that the company was failing at. Engaging appropriately with their customers. It's about listening to the customer's problems first and say, okay, how would we go about solving that? Not, I have a product here I want you to buy, but how do we solve your problem collectively? And that's really the approach that I think we're taking, is not looking at, I got a thing that I want to find a solution for. It's, I have a problem that I can work with the individual to create that solution.
Well, and I need guys like you around us when we're doing this. And, I'll say this, and Ascendium is doing way more than this statement, but we're kind of internally calling Ascendium the software development wing of human capital resource. What I really mean when we say that is when we get on these discovery calls, whether it's a group of 5 restaurants, 1 restaurant owner, or 50, and it can be retail and healthcare and any of the industries we're in, but focusing on hospitality. Right now, we're in a closed beta with the hourly tech. What I love about that is I will talk about some of our competitors. We a little bit have a HubSpot philosophy as a flywheel, meaning we're already starting off with we're going to get you in something that's going to be great. It's going to beat your competitor price. When I say this, the average client out of 200 signed hospitality enterprise endeavors, the average per unit spend is $1,700 per month per job ad. And we're talking hourlies, Bob. So these people are being paid $283. They're highly critical, but that's just not sustainable. So you back up from that. And when we're approaching these co-development for that single owner operator that doesn't have time, we've got a quick fix. We're going to get you on there. When we're doing the co-development, we're really starting to look at the HRIS procedures, the onboarding, really tracking that candidate from stage 1 to stage end. And, as being a channel partner with folks like Rippling, GoCo, Bamboo, they're all fantastic software guys. But at the end of the day, they are built to be another platform of leasing your data. That's why you're paying a per person per payroll. That's why you're also paying a per person per your HRIS, per your ATS, right? Your CRM for some of these folks that are out there. When you back up from that and understand the foundational conversation that Bob's having, you're leasing your data. So if I have multiple logons to multiple leased data, expand that, right? I'm talking to the owners now. I want you to think about that. If we took all that revenue back, specifically in hospitality, guys, we're talking about 8 to 18% EBITDAs. We're talking about increases of commodity 6 to 12%. The fucking math does not add up. So where I get really passionate about what we're doing too, Bob, is, man, similar to you, when I got out of hospitality, I fought tooth and nail to never be back in this space. What I realized is becoming more of an educated and calmer man as I've aged a little bit is that this is really how I cut my teeth. A lot of how I look at the world was what hospitality gave me. I had to be able to keep multiple people happy in multiple states under chaos, high quality of life, but high stress. And now where I sit post pandemic, I don't think most people understand, like owners, operators, brands that we represent. I know what you guys are going through. You might not understand as much about technology, but we can pick back up those 6 to 12 points instantaneously while building a better process. Now, and this is what we'll be going through, Bob, and you've already been on some discovery calls with us. And I don't want to offend people when I say this, but most of the hospitality endeavors that are 150 units plus, that are doing 250 million plus, when we talk about their senior executives for technology, 99% of them were a former operator that were trained from within. And then when it pisses me off, Bob, that doesn't make them bad at what they do. But when they are going for solutions to real world problems, they're talking to sales teams that are selling multiple competing solutions that aren't really a solution, right? And, just to kind of talk about that for a little bit, I know you've seen the same in your space, but I think that aligns our passions quite a bit around my subject might be a little bit different about owning data or not. But ultimately, if you get back to the base bones, this is kind of an ugly stepsister that's in the room with everybody that I think people just aren't aware about, right? And we're dancing around. So, any comments you want to add into that piece a little bit?
Yeah, I'd say that the CIO world, the Chief Information Officer world, is mostly from the applications versus infrastructure. And the problem with that is, from an application standpoint, not understanding what the infrastructure looks like, not understanding what security looks like, not understanding these other elements, you kind of miss the big picture, which is how do you utilize different tools effectively? And so I see this in cybersecurity. I see this in information technology in general. Too many tools doing too many competing things, and fundamentally, you don't get anything right. So it's getting to the right amount of tools, the information in the right location, so that it meets the business needs versus all these people trying to sell you something else that's going to be an add-on.
And what I've really learned from working with you and Sebastian over the last, year is a great operator and a great engineer. Although our training might be different, we're thinking about the same things. I want it to be as effective as possible and as cheap as possible for my clients or myself. I don't need the bells and whistles because I know ultimately that my clients need to be in the field driving their sales for whatever endeavor they're on. I think what's interesting about the way you guys perceive it too is you start with the same pain points. Like, what is your pain point? What is the problem? We don't necessarily have to develop this bells and whistles, but we could if that's what's needed. For sure we can go all in. So I think it's been an interesting perspective. I want to pivot a little bit as we're starting to time out towards the end here, and just talk a little bit about how you and I started working together, where we see Ascendium going. So right now, Bob, I know a lot about CSM. We don't have to talk about the internal details of CSM or HC Resource. But let's talk a little bit about the clients that we hope are coming to us for needs, right? I mean, so what I've been saying to all my work, I'll release some of this now. Some of the discovery calls we've had in the last couple of weeks, predominantly 80% hospitality because we're focusing on our network. But at the same time, some of this great inventory technology that we're making internally for hospitality, we can quickly turn around. We've talked to some Indianapolis 500 racing teams. We've talked to some conglomerates that are in manufacturing overseas. And what's interesting to me is all those clients are coming in with similar pain points, right? They might be different industries, but it's workflow opportunities. And, there's a couple of times where we've suggested, hey, we're going to tailor fit this for you and we can build this out in 6 months if that's what the client wants and needs. And other times we've been able to apply a really quick solution and get them into a reoccurring revenue with us where we're saving money. But what are the kind of clients that you're hoping coming to us over the next 6 to 12 months, kind of in needs? Like, what do they look like from your perspective and how can we help them?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that the underserved industries are who will get the most help. These are industries that they don't have a lot of extra capital. They're spending a lot of money on stuff that they may or may not need, that there's probably better ways for them to operate. And these are industries that could improve their profitability by approaching technology different. A lot of times these underserved industries, so they don't have a lot of capital, they don't have a lot of money, but they do have a large need. Those needs, if they're done cost effectively, can cause them to operate more profitably. And I think that's really the sweet spot. And it doesn't have to be hospitality. It can be any industry that falls into that category. The very large companies, like some of the companies I have today that I work with, they have enough capital. They can go to big tech and have big tech create solutions. We're really looking at providing more tailored solutions for industries that are not one size fit all, that can be done at a very, very small scale and make people far more effective and more profitable. To me, that's who I'm looking at. I think this is where the sweet spot is.
I think the same for us too. And it's funny because we both represent conglomerates, and as I've said that too, how the pitches go at, when we started this, I guess I can release it because we're going to have the landing page up for it. The hourly tech that we've been working on is going to land in called Staffed. We really love it. There's potential for this to be a platform. But what I loved about the beta is even when we're going in thinking the enterprise clients wouldn't need it because they're so buttoned up, goodness gracious, almost 100% of them did. That's out of the 2,000 units we have signed up, 80% of them are enterprise clients. What I love about that too, though, Bob, is what we're really doing in the real world is, hey, we're going to give you this for free in the closed beta. We need feedback, right? So if you're talking to anyone on my team right now, the biggest payment we can give or we can get from you is feedback. We're also trying to cherry pick some of the best operators, so the field's going to give us some insights. But I think is really interesting about that is it's really exposing to the groups, not to us, just from the intake. Hey, talk to me about all these systems you have. And why are you spending it like this? Why do you have an HRIS from People Matter? Why do you then have Yardbird to do your performance reviews? Why do you then have hot schedules? Yeah, sometimes it's baked in. So I think it's a lot of exposure to maybe a different way to do it. So I agree with Bob on those ICPs. But what I would also say, if you're a conglomerate that's out there and potentially you want to build a tailor fit solution, whether it's around operations, whether it's around recruiting, open table, CRMs, start to engage with our team. I think you'll see enough content coming out about some of the stuff that we're working on. And the thing that I love about Bob, and I'm going to say this for him, we're both willing to work with big tech. So if you're a big tech client that's out there, we're well aware what the world is. We just want you to be a little bit aware of some of the opportunities that are potentially coming. And I don't think, Bob, that most conglomerate CEOs are any different than you and I, right? Because we both been those folks before. I think the right kind of people that need a solution fixed and they want to tailor fit this, our team is not even small anymore, but pretty mighty. Love to get you in. We're looking for people that have workflow opportunities. We're not going to be the people that are going to sell you an agentic robot yet. That's going to completely do something. I think that's Bob's and my vision. But I think a really good conversation, Bob. I'm sure you and I are going to be on quite a few times. Anything else you'd like to leave the guests with? We're going to post all your socials. We'll do some links to CSM. But I just think this is a really good episode for some of our clients to get to know you, and also some of the hospitality folks, just to get a little immersed in this technology. Anything you want to leave the fans or the guests with before we take off for the day?
The only other thing is that technology, so no longer that technology is not part of the business. Technology is the business. And this is kind of the transition. It doesn't really matter no matter who you are, a restaurant, no matter what you are, you need technology to get the reach, to get the customers. So, starting with that, our job is really to translate that so that people can adapt to this reality that we have.
And I think you're a great guy to do that too, Bobby. You've definitely educated myself on engineering, and I'm not afraid to ask you probably brain dead questions at times, and you never make me feel silly for asking them. But it's great to get to know you a little bit more in this depth. We'll link all of Bob's socials below and some of the content he's going to be putting out, and also the link to CSM. But Mr. Jamieson, I thank you for being here, and hopefully it's a little bit warmer in Pennsylvania today than it is in Indiana. But thanks for joining.
Thanks, Shaun.
All right, good to see you.
All right, bye.